Al Jazeera says its coverage of the conflict in Gaza will not be affected by a shutdown issued by the government. The measure issued yesterday includes closing all Al Jazeera offices in Israel, confiscating broadcast equipment, cutting off the channel from cable and satellite companies. This as the conflict continues.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu previously accused Al Jazeera of harming Israel's security and actively participating in the October 7th massacre.
We strongly condemn and denounce this criminal act that violates human rights and the basic right to access of information. Israel's direct targeting and killing of journalists, arrests, intimidation, and the threats will not deter Al Jazeera from its commitment to cover, whilst more than 140 Palestinian journalists have been killed since the beginning of the war on Gaza.
And let's now speak to Thembisa Fakude, Senior Research Fellow at the Africa-Asia Dialogues and former Bureau Chief at Al Jazeera Southern Africa. Thembisa, good morning. Thank you so much for making time for us. I was telling the team earlier on as we were prepping for this conversation that just on Friday, the world was marking World Press Freedom Day. And then over the weekend, this news breaks. What do you read into this decision that has been taken by the Israeli cabinet?
I think it's typical of Benjamin Netanyahu. As you know, that UNESCO awarded Al Jazeera one of its prestigious awards, honoring all the Palestinian journalists that have been working in covering the war on Gaza. And Al Jazeera continues to win accolades around the world. At the New York Film Festival, Al Jazeera was voted as the world's best news organization in 2024, which has been happening over the years. So I think Benjamin Netanyahu found himself in a position where he did not like what he heard and saw. One. Number two is, you know, there's continuing protests in Israel, Tel Aviv, and very few organizations around the world are covering those. The only institution that has been persistent in their coverage has been Al Jazeera. So thousands of Israeli citizens are calling for his resignation because of one, mishandling of the negotiations between Hamas and Israel in terms of releasing the hostages that are currently held in Gaza. So this is a problem, and he has indicated in the past that he was going to be doing this, so it was expected.
Yeah. Should we understand this to also mean that there's a belief in the Israeli government that Al Jazeera is not only a political platform, but some countries in the Middle East are actually using it to propagate propaganda?
Well, that's what they say. But again, the accolades that Al Jazeera's colleagues, other news organizations around the world, and journalists continue to give this channel, this comes, of course, as it's a vote of confidence for Al Jazeera. Many people are saying it's expected because all the dictators in the Middle East are doing the same. If you think about it, Egypt has banned Al Jazeera in the past, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates. So all of these countries where Al Jazeera has continued to tell the story has done so in the past. So Israel is not the first one. Others have done so, and they continue, of course, accusing Al Jazeera of siding with terrorists, in this case Hamas, notwithstanding that Al Jazeera has been quite critical in coverage of both Hezbollah and Hamas in the past.
Yeah. Is this something that you think that the industry should have anticipated could happen? Also considering that you have, remember, I think it was sometime last year when CNN was also in Israel, but part of the Israeli Defense Force, and they had agreed to actually hand over their footage to the Israeli Defense Force, let them have sight of it first before the footage is being broadcasted. So already last year we saw interference when it comes to the editorial processes that are undertaken by a newsroom.
Yeah, it's true. But if you look at the institution that has been targeted throughout the world, whether journalists killed, Shireen Abu Akleh, for example, or journalists arrested, or bureaus being bombed, whether in Gaza or in Tunisia and other places, it's always been Al Jazeera. And I think the other thing which is very important, and somebody mentioned it yesterday, the reason why Al Jazeera decided to open offices in Israel was to give the Israelis the chance to air their own opinion, because most of the Middle East news institution organization are outside Israel, reporting from outside. And it decided deliberately to open the office so that Israelis can have a chance to speak to the Arab world, but importantly to also give their own opinion on what they feel and their understanding of what's going on in the Middle East. So it's a difficult, sad time. But again, I think this calls on for a solidarity with all journalists around the world. And we need just to be careful on who we support and what we do when some of our colleagues are in trouble. I said this before when people were quiet when Russia Today's offices and Broadcast International was shut down.
Yeah, actually, if you look even at the decision that has been taken by the US government in terms of TikTok and shutting down of TikTok, or the conditions that have been touched with the ByteDance, it's essentially we are speaking about freedom of expression, and our freedom of expression can just be curtailed, just like that, by an executive decision.
It can be curtailed just like that by an executive decision, but also the fact that sometimes we're also, we choose who to criticize and who not to criticize, whether we agree or disagree, for example, with Russia Today, TikTok and others. We should stand firm for the protection of journalism and the protection of freedom of expression. And unfortunately, sometimes we are found wanting as members of the media in terms of being firm and stand in solidarity, whatever side one might find himself or herself in terms of insistence on protection of the rights of journalists to do their work.
Yeah, but isn't it also true that newsrooms themselves are also a product of the society that they exist in and a product of a society that they come out of? And sometimes those biases also seep through.
True, but there are also basic principles and tenets of journalism. Objectivity, I know is controversial, but we have to stand firm for what we believe in terms of trying to be truthful in telling our news. We have to resist of becoming mouthpiece of governments. We need to remember that our responsibility, first and foremost, is to inform the public. Hence, people insisting of calling themselves public institution, not government broadcasters. Yeah. And I think sometimes we find ourselves wanting in that regard. Yes, there will always be that trickling and intervention on others, particularly those with deep pockets wanting to influence how we tell journalism. But our responsibility is to insist at all given time to stand firm in terms of telling the truth and being objective, however controversial the term is, in terms of continuing reporting what is truthful and what reflects the truth on the ground when we do our work.
What does international solidarity look like for colleagues from colleagues at Al Jazeera?
Well, at the moment, it's not that strong. And the reason is because there's just so much going on in Al Jazeera. Not long ago, you had one of Al Jazeera's senior journalists, Wael Daouda. His family was killed. His son was shot also, who used to work for Al Jazeera. Not long ago, 2 years ago, he had Shirin Abu Akleh, who was also shot point blank by Israeli government. We've got officers of Al Jazeera shutting down. There's just too much going on for Al Jazeera. We know that other institutions, particularly the journalism bodies, are continuing to support Al Jazeera. But when it comes to independent organizations, colleagues on the ground, I think the solidarity has been waning and very slow, again, because they also don't want to be seen to be supporting Al Jazeera's accusations, but this by governments. So the solidarity on Al Jazeera is not that strong at the moment, at least when it comes to other independent media organizations. They've reported on it. Yesterday you had this trickling of reportage on what's happening to Al Jazeera by BBC, CNN and others, but there hasn't been any emphasis on strong reportage and continuing coverage on how this is going to impact journalism in the region.
Because coverage on its own is not activism, but what should solidarity look like?
One is use our platforms to amplify the wrong that is taking place. So the solidarity will be at least dedicating some time within our coverage to report on exactly what happened and why it shouldn't happen. And I'm not saying that media organizations should themselves take sides and be in solidarity with Al Jazeera, but they can pull all of these platforms that support journalism around the world and grant them sufficient time for them to speak and condemn what happened in Israel and why it's important for us to continue standing firm. So it's not our job as journalists to be in solidarity with, openly in solidarity in our coverage. But there are many, many other players and stakeholders within the media fraternity whose responsibility is to emphasize and articulate the position of journalism. And I haven't seen that happening. And we have a lot of what we call in television, as you know, at the bottom of the hour, where you have these independent voices coming in and current affairs and commenting. CNN has got that, Sky, Al Jazeera has got plenty of that. We haven't seen that happening. Yeah. And I would have expected that platform would have been used to emphasize why it's important for us to protect freedom of expression and journalism.
Yeah, I don't know, and I'd love to hear your take on this as well, Thembisa. It seems as though that generally this is something that the media struggles with, even right here back home. Remember the leaked audio from an ANC-NEC meeting where former president, well, not former president, but the president of the ANC, that is Cyril Ramaphosa, spoke about a war on the negative media. Yes, there's been coverage on it, but as I say, that coverage doesn't necessarily mean activism. So as media houses, we really struggle when it comes to solidarity.
Yes, and we're not activists, but we do have platforms that represent journalism. And those are the platforms that must be given airtime to express and condemn such statements. But unfortunately, even those platforms, because they are most of whom are dependent on funding, they sometimes drag their feet when it comes to criticizing certain culprits for working against journalism. And in this case, globally, we have a number of these platforms that seek, or at least suggest to be representing media organizations and media in general, including the rights of journalism, to work freely and facilitate an environment that allows free journalism. But we, again, find them sometimes dragging their feet when it comes to condemning, for example, what has happened yesterday when Israeli cabinet decided to ban Al Jazeera. So we have to emphasize on that. And hopefully these platforms will be amplified and be loud enough next time. But again, journalism is not activism. We have to continue telling the story. The best you can do, for example, as Newzroom Afrika, is to tell the story of what happened yesterday and report on the close of Al Jazeera, but we don't expect you to start toying and being an activist in terms of, condemning Israel and promoting Al Jazeera. That is the responsibility of, International Press Institute and other platforms that are, purporting to be representing journalism in the world and in the country.
Yeah, I wonder if that is the right approach also. But we've come to the end of the conversation. But I wonder if that is the right approach, because it is the newsrooms that are affected. Shouldn't the newsrooms also be the ones that are actually active in taking to the streets? At least the 97 journalists also that have died in Gaza since the start of the war, and we haven't heard as yet from Benjamin Netanyahu expressing his condolences to the families of those 97 journalists. But thank you so much for your time. Thembisa Fakude is a senior research fellow at the Africa-Asia Dialogues and also former bureau chief at Al Jazeera Southern Africa.